Welcome to our Literacy Live 2013-2014 webinar series, Balancing the Prevention and Intervention of Reading Difficulties. I'm Laura Adams, Literacy Consultant at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction.
And I'm Tamara Maxwell, the English Language Arts Consultant at the department.
The focus of today's webinar is on designing universal instruction for prevention. As you may recall, this is the graphic that is representing our 2013-2014 Connected Webinar Series, Strengthening Universal Instruction and Intervention to Ensure Success for All Students with Grade-Level Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts. In the first half of our series, we focused on the intervention side of this chart, examining the who, the structure, the what or content, and progress monitoring of reading interventions. Now we turn our attention to the other side of the chart and examining the systems and structures in place at the universal level with the goal of preventing reading difficulties. Again, in each one of our webinars in the second semester, we will be focusing on the who, the structure, the what, and progress monitoring within the universal level of reading curriculum. The goal for today's particular webinar, as you can see here on the screen, is to explore existing resources that enable educators to strengthen the universal instruction for all learners. As a reminder, Wisconsin does have a state statute regarding a reading specialist. It states that each school district shall employ a reading specialist certified by the department to develop and coordinate a comprehensive reading curriculum grades K through 12. For an overview of the role of the reading specialist, you can visit a previously recorded webinar at the address on your screen. And these are those duties as outlined in State Statute 118.015. And please note, wherever it says reading curriculum, that encompasses both the universal level of reading curriculum as well as interventions. It does also include progress monitoring of the reading curriculum and the tools that you would need in order to conduct that progress monitoring. As a reminder, the reading specialist never works in isolation. Communication is a very important part of the reading specialist job, and in order to implement that reading curriculum successfully, you need to work with administrators, educators, coaches, special educators, teachers of English language learners, school psychologists, librarians, parents, and community members. All of these people are needed in order to successfully implement the reading curriculum.
So today we're going to pose these 4 guiding questions when we take a look at developing and strengthening our universal instruction within our core classroom. How does your instructional framework allow for meeting the needs of all learners within core classroom? How much time is allocated daily for universal instruction? How do you structure standards-based reading instruction? And also, what tools, resources are utilized to monitor students' progress? Although we cannot control the amount of time allocated in our daily universal instruction, one thing that we can do as instructors is decide how we're going to use that time. So we're hoping as we go through today and show you some of the resources that we have, that you'll be able to see how you can use different tools and resources to make the most of our time with our students at the universal level.
And again, thinking about our reading specialists, we're connecting back to some of these specified duties, developing and implementing a reading curriculum, and serving as a resource person to implement that reading curriculum. The resources that we share with you today that will address these 4 guiding questions will also help fulfill those elements of the reading specialist duties. As a reminder, so we're going to be talking about one particular instructional framework that is research-based, and it is a district's local decision instructional framework they want to choose to use within their school district. But whichever instructional framework you decide to use, it should adhere to or align with Wisconsin's guiding principles for teaching and learning. These are research-based guiding principles for teaching and learning. You can see here they are on your screen. And the instructional framework that we are going to be exploring in depth today does adhere to these guiding principles for teaching and learning. But this should be part of that decision-making process when you're selecting an instructional framework to use.
So we're going to take a look at the gradual release of responsibility instructional framework. You can see here on your screen, at the bottom of the screen, there's a direct link to the URL that will take you to our Instruction Live Finder, which is a repository of resources of different instructional practices that instructors can select in using within the instructional framework. So also we have these links to this on both the Read Wisconsin website as well as the ELA website. There are 3 buttons that you'll see: Standards, Instruction, and Assessment. And if you click on the Instruction button, it'll take you right to our Instruction Live Finder. So why don't we go to our Instruction Live Finder and to showcase what the framework does and how we can operate within that framework.
Great. Sounds good. So we're going to take you there, and it's going to take just a minute to get there. Let's see. Here we go.
Okay.
Right here.
As it's coming up here, you can see that we have the visual, and this visual is coming from Doug Fisher and Nancy Fry. Although the seeds of the gradual release of responsibility instructional framework dates back to the 1980s with Pearson's work. So here we have 4 components of the framework. The first component is the focus lesson. This is the I do it, where the teacher is in complete control of instruction. The second component is guided instruction. This is the we do it, where the teacher still has more responsibility of instruction, however, the student is also participating. And the third component is the we do it together, or where students are working collaboratively while the teacher is observing and providing feedback to the students on their learning. And the fourth component is this idea of independent learning, where students are doing the work alone. Now, again, the teacher still has some part in there in the idea of setting the independent learning up, as well as providing feedback to the student in their learning.
And I think that you can see right away how having an instructional framework like this right away provides the instructor with the time in order to really meet the needs of all learners. And again, it does take some very systematic instruction on designing your routines and procedures in order to make such a framework work, and attention really needs to be paid to that. But I think you can already start to see how having such an instructional framework really provides for meeting the needs of all learners.
Yes, you're right, Laura. Because if you look at it, it looks like it's the way that it is organized. It looks like it's a very linear process. However, you can work through it in a very linear way, starting with a focus lesson, then going to guided instruction, collaborative work, and independent. However, we see it as a very flexible model, too, so that if you wanted to begin your lesson with collaborative work, you could, observing student work, providing them feedback. If you realize that they're not doing well in their learning, that they're struggling, you might want to go back to guided instruction, where you are both having responsibility for the learning. If you notice that students are still struggling, then you could go back to the focus lesson. So it's a very responsive framework, which goes back to those Wisconsin's guiding principles for teaching and learning. Just a little orientation to the Live Finder here. You can see at the top we have these tabs, and then underneath we have these sub-tabs. And we reference the guiding principles for teaching and learning, and you can see that under that first tab that is something there that we have, that idea of making sure that whichever instructional framework you do use, that it does adhere to Wisconsin's guiding principles for teaching and learning. There are some other resources there that when you have some time to take a look at. The second tab provides an overview of the gradual release of responsibility, and there are also some research articles on those sub-tabs in that topic. But the real need of it is within the actual components of the gradual release of responsibility framework, the focus lesson tab, guided instruction tab, collaborative learning, and independent task tabs. Because within those main tabs, there are different sub-tabs. And each of those sub-tabs provides a different instructional practice that teachers can engage in as a way to scaffold student learning. So, for example, if a teacher were doing a focus lesson, they could select from any of these instructional practices that best meet, one, what it is that they're instructing on, and two, where their students are in their learning. So, for example, in a focus lesson, a teacher might decide to activate and build background knowledge. As this is coming up, you can see that for each instructional practice that we have highlighted, that there is research to support it, as well as a video of what it looks like in the classroom. Now, we acknowledge that this is not an exhaustive list, but there are many other instructional practices that one could choose within the instructional framework. However, we feel like this is a good handful of research-based instructional practices that have a research base, number one, and two, you can see it in action with the video. So there are a variety of different instructional practices or things that the teacher can be doing during a focus lesson. If you click on the next tab for guided instruction, you'll also see a variety of instructional practices the teacher can engage in. And for each one of those, take, for example, doing an interrupted read, that you'll see both the research piece for it as well as what that looks like in the classroom. Now, we did design this Instruction Live Binder as a PK-12. So in all of these videos, you'll see somebody from the PK through 12 grades to illustrate that. Again, guided practice is that component of the lesson where the teacher and the students are both sharing responsibility. However, the teacher has more responsibility at that time, but is beginning to engage students. So for the collaborative learning tab, you can see a variety of instructional practices that the teachers would engage in. For example, reciprocal teaching. Reciprocal teaching is when students take on the role of teacher and provide instruction to their colleagues. Another similar practice would be partner read. Again, this is the portion of the lesson where students are working together and the teacher is observing, conferring with students, and providing feedback to the students.
And when we start to think about conferring with students or this tab labeled teacher observation, the tab labeled feedback, now we can also start to think about the fact that we have some progress monitoring ideas here. And so not only do we have an instructional framework that allows for meeting the needs of all students, kind of provides a guide for what you can do with your allocated time dedicated to universal instruction. Obviously, we have the framework here, how you can structure that standards-based reading instruction, and now we have some tools and resources that the instructor can use to monitor students' progress that are built right into this live binder, and again, research-based.
Absolutely, Laura. And when we get into our next resource that we want to share with you, we'll see some one-pagers or some handouts to help with that process too. So, in the last component here, the independent task, you again can see that although the students are doing it alone, the teacher still has a role in here in providing exemplars for students so they know what proficiency looks like, as well as different performance criteria, rubrics, scoring guides. And again, this is an opportunity for teachers to confer with their students, and to provide feedback on their learning. So.
This idea of having mentor texts or exemplars also reminds me that a critical piece in the process here is text selection.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. When we're talking about this idea of selecting tools and resources to develop and strengthen core instruction, that is one tool or one resource that we have is identifying what text are we going to be using with our students. If we realize that our instructional text our students might struggle with that, then what we can do is select one of those instructional practices in order to scaffold the instruction so all students have access to grade level text.
As a reminder, we have some professional learning resources that specifically deal with selecting text, and we'll show you the web address at the end of this webinar where you can find those.
So if we go back here to this, you can see again that this instructional framework does meet Wisconsin's guiding principles for teaching and learning, that it is a flexible framework, that you can move throughout the 4 components of the framework, that you do not need to start at the top with a focus lesson and work through it. However, you can do that.
Yep. And the one thing I was going to add is that thinking about the fact that this is a flexible model means that depending upon the amount of time that you actually have or the needs of the learners on any particular day, you may not even see all 4 components within one day. Depending upon the needs of the learners, one particular class period or dedicated instructional time period may just be working through that collaborative component of the instructional framework.
Sure, and that's why it's so important that we're using teacher observation and being able to confer with students to be able to, for students to provide instructors feedback on their learning, and also for teachers to provide feedback to students. And that way you know if you need to stay within a certain component of that instructional framework for a longer time.
Absolutely. So as Tamara referenced, we have one more resource that we really want to share with you, and this is the Instructional Practices and Strategies Bank that again was co-developed between the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction and the Wisconsin RTI Center. Mm-hmm. So again, we're going to take you there in just a moment. Okay, and here's where we want to go. Slowly coming up on the screen. Here we go. Fantastic.
Okay. This is the Classroom Strategies and Practices Bank. We're talking about developing and strengthening our core instruction. And so within our instructional framework of gradual release of responsibility, educators have an opportunity to select what resources they're using to move students through their learning. They can select their instructional practices to scaffold student learning, but they also can select what research-based student strategies they're going to use to support student learning. So in partnership with the RTI Center, the DPI has created this repository of research-based strategies, and it's organized by strand. And right now we have research-based strategies for reading, both literature and informational text, in addition to all of the foundational skills. And we also have strategies for the language standards as well. We're still developing our research-based strategies for the writing strand as well as speaking and listening, and mathematics is currently developing their strategy bank. So we want to just give you a quick look at the resource that we have, and we'll do that by taking a look at the reading. You can see here that it's within the strand, strategies are divided either K-5 or 612. And you can also see that there are tabs there, so within K-5 and 612, that you also have reading literature, reading informational text, and reading foundational skills. So under each one of the strands within the grade band, The strategies are organized at the cluster level. So if you're working with your students and you know that they're struggling with character development, you could go here and identify, well, character development, that's falling under that idea of key ideas and details, and you can select the character map as a research-based strategy to support students' understanding. So for each one of these strategies, we've created these one-pagers. And within these one-pagers, it tells about the strategy. It tells you how to implement the strategy, how to measure students' learning, as well as provides the research base. In addition, if there's a reproducible that students would engage with, that too is included. So for character map, we have 3 different types of reproducibles for kindergarten through grade 5 for students, depending upon what their developmental needs are. So you can see here in this one that students would be able to draw a picture of a character, and perhaps they would be able to write words to describe the character. In the next reproducible, we have this one is a little bit more sophisticated of a character map for late elementary, and even really through high school you could use this graphic. But thinking about different forms of characterization, what does the character say and think? What does the character look like? How does the character feel? What do other characters think about that character? So this graphic organizer for the characterization would help students organize and develop their thoughts about character. And then there's another one too. Again, same thing, same research base. It's a graphic organizer that's really helping students develop their ideas about character. So in each one of these strategies that we have, we've created these one-pagers that will provide you all of the information that you need to know about the strategy, how to implement, how to measure student progress, and also it provides something for students to engage with. So again, we don't always have control about how much time we spend with students, but what we can do is make the most of the time that we do have with our students. And we can do that by having a flexible instructional framework where we're selecting our instructional practices, the text that we're engaging students with, as well as the research-based strategy in order for all students to have access to grade level standards and to be engaged with their learning.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's really important to call out the fact that Instructional Practices and Strategies Bank is organized by standards. And so it's clearly very standards-based. And again, thinking about that character map, we wouldn't ask students to fill that out just for the sake of filling that out. They're doing that in service towards some greater learning, something that they're going to do with that reading, for example. So some additional professional learning resources where you can find more information on the gradual release of responsibility, how some particular Wisconsin have taken that learning